we've got some updates on what is likely to happen at the border should Biden go through with it. But in what likely will spark the ire of his progressive base, the White House and the Biden administration is mulling the possibility of executive actions at the southern border, specifically for asylum seekers who enter the country illegally rather than through a legal port of entry. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, it's because it's a very similar policy to what was implemented under the Trump administration. Now, I want to be clear that they are thinking about doing this. It doesn't mean that they're definitely gonna do it, especially considering some of the legal ramifications and the court challenges that will arise from it. But let me give you the details on what they're thinking. Now, first, the migrant crisis is something that the Biden administration is concerned about, especially because for the first time, it's really impacting big blue cities, places like Chicago and New York. The local communities there have been frustrated by the influx of migrants and the fact that they don't have the necessary resources to house them, shelter them. In December alone, 300,000 migrants entered the country. The number did decline in January, as CNN notes. In January, the US Border Patrol reported 124,220 reported encounters along the US-Mexico border. Notably, there was a significant drop in Venezuelans, nearly 11,600 compared to 57,851 in December. Both the US and Mexico have restarted deportation flights to Venezuela. So that's what the current situation is. And what Biden and the White House were hoping for was that Congress would in fact pass that bipartisan border bill, which ended up getting killed in Congress because Donald Trump told Republicans not to pass it. And so now the Biden administration is thinking about taking the executive action. No final decision has been made on the action under consideration, which involves using an authority known as 212F between ports of entry to try to clamp down on unlawful border crossings. It's unclear how the proclamation under discussion would be executed and what, if anything, would be different from what was enacted during the Trump administration. Now, for a little bit of background on 212F and when it was implemented under Trump, back in 2018, Trump tried to use it, which gives the president broad authority to implement immigration restrictions to restrict border crossings. But ultimately, a federal appeals court ruled in East Bay Sanctuary Covenant versus Trump that the authority conflicts with asylum law and that 212F authority doesn't override it. And there are some immigration experts who have weighed in on the possibility of the Biden administration implementing a similar type of policy at the border. For instance, Stephen Yale Lohr says the following: President Biden has broad powers under the immigration statute, but they are not unlimited, okay? So Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act allows a president to suspend the entry of non-citizens who are detrimental to the interests of the United States. But that doesn't mean he can just shut the border to everyone. So if the administration is in fact thinking about implementing that same policy that we saw from Donald Trump in 2018, they most certainly will be met with resistance in the courts. And we already are hearing from some progressives in Congress who believe that Biden would be making a huge mistake if he moves forward with this. But there are other things that Biden has on his mind, including how to replenish the dwindling resources necessary to control the border. We'll get to that in a moment.
We might have millions of people watching this show, but you can be the difference maker because we just need 1% of our audience to be paid members, and then this show can be around forever. So you can make that difference. Click join now.
Cenk, what are your thoughts on the possibility of Biden implementing this policy? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think that at this point, immigration is considered a detriment to the best interests of the country?
Yeah, so we got to start at the beginning actually, because I think the concept of open and closed border is a misnomer. So I think that when people say open borders, the right wing imagines that it's actually perfectly legal to just walk into the country. There's no law enforcement at all. Anybody can come in and stay, and that's not the case at all. Right now, at the same time, tons of people come in without documents, and we can't catch them all. And when people ask for asylum, we go through a process. And in that process, since it takes a while, there's this thing called catch and release. So you catch people, they apply for asylum, and then you release them until their hearings. And then after the hearing, they either get to stay or the great overwhelming majority of them are deported. And now we've shared with you the stats before that well over 80% return for their hearings. So the idea that none of them ever return is also not true. Now, having said that, I think catch and release could be problematic. And I could see why a lot of the country is very frustrated by it. But if you're gonna do something draconian that is not catch and release, well, it is by definition detaining them. And yes, detaining them means in a place where you could characterize as a cage, a prison, some sort of facility that contains folks and they're not allowed to leave, right? So
I don't like that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, that's that's the conversation we're having. So when you say close the border, I want people to understand that's what it means. So and
so
one of the biggest problems, a couple of other things as well, but let's talk about it. Let's understand the concept, and then I'll tell you what I think should be done.
So the reason why asylum seekers end up, yes, catch and release, if that's the way you want to refer to it, is because we have this massive backlog of asylum seekers that need to be processed and have their argument or their case adjudicated before an immigration judge. The problem is there's been such a giant influx of migrants seeking asylum, and not all of those asylum claims are legitimate. I totally acknowledge that, but you still have laws, immigration laws, that indicate that you must listen and make a decision about their asylum claim. And we don't have enough judges, we don't have enough resources at the border. The idea of detaining them, look, we've seen what the conditions at these detention centers happen to be. We've seen how the use of these facilities, most of them tend to be for-profit facilities, just terrible conditions. We've seen children literally die in detention. And so I want to find a solution, if we can, that's as humane as possible, but that's also fair to the American people and the cities that are most impacted by this, whether it be border cities or some of these big metropolitan areas in Illinois and in New York. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is if we don't have a Congress that's willing to pass legislation that would reform the laws and also provide the necessary resources to actually adjudicate these asylum claims.
Yeah, there are no answers without legislation in this case. There's only, to be fair, there are answers, there's just bad ones. So let me explain what I think should be done, and then we can get into what should Biden do under this circumstance, which is, look, and I said the same exact thing under the Trump administration, and part of it, the right wing will find outrageous and never agree to, and part of it the left wing does not like at all either. So there has to be a pathway to citizenship, and there has to be a really good way of going through the asylum process as quickly as possible. So does that mean you fund more judges at the borders? Absolutely. Does it mean you have more border security? Yes, okay. And but pathway to citizenship has to be real. There has to be a way for immigrants to come here, not only for their sake, but for our sake. Who are we kidding? We employ millions of undocumented immigrants in this country, and anytime there's a raid on one of the facilities, a factory, a farm, etc., a couple of weeks later, they totally regret it. They usually bring the people back, and it's part of the local economy, and the local economy is devastated, and the businesses are devastated, etc., if they're not around. So why are we kidding ourselves? Why don't you make it legal, have a controlled number of people that come in, as many as we need, and that's a win-win for us, for them, have a good asylum process. But the trade-off is, once you set that in place, no, if you cross the border illegally, you don't get to apply for asylum, you don't get to stay, you're gone, immediately deported. You follow process there, because there is a process in that scenario, otherwise you're immediately deported. And by the way, if you've been deported once like that, sorry, you lose an ability to ever become an American citizen. So you could so the left will hate that part, but that's a fair trade-off if you've provided an outlet for people to come here legally. But without that outlet, if all you do is just deport everyone, Well, then we're breaking international law by not allowing for asylum. We're also being inhumane. And it's a preposterous system and then you're gonna stuff people in the cages with no process, no ability to become citizens, no nothing, right? And that doesn't make sense either. So you have to have both parts, otherwise it's gonna fall apart. And you can't do the part about the pathway to citizenship without Congress voting on it, because it involves spending money. He can't just do it through executive action. All he can do is what he's proposing now, which is some of the draconian parts with none of the positive parts.
And look, the draconian parts have already been ruled down in the Trump administration. So I don't know how Biden would be able to carry this out without successful challenges through the court system. And he is also considering calling a national emergency to shore up some funding for the border. He had requested $14 billion for border funding in that supplemental funding bill. Obviously, that bill has had a very difficult time passing in Congress. Congress right now is basically useless. They have no interest in passing any legislation. At this point, I think every member of Congress is just focusing on the election and making decisions about whether they even consider legislation based on the election, which is unfortunate because, as you all know, we have all sorts of issues in the country that need to be dealt with, and they're just not doing their jobs. Now, what has Biden already done in regard to immigration? Well, last year, the administration released a regulation largely barring migrants who traveled through other countries on their way to the United States. So the argument is that they should have claimed asylum in a different country instead of traveling through a bunch of other countries to get here to the United States. But I mean, he implemented that last year, and clearly either it's not being enforced or it's not working. At the same time, the White House is calling out Republicans who have squashed the immigration reform bill that they've always wanted, always dreamed of. A White House spokesperson says that no executive action, no matter how aggressive, can deliver the significant policy reforms and additional resources Congress can provide, and that Republicans rejected. We continue to call on Speaker Johnson and House Republicans to pass the bipartisan deal to secure the border. I don't think they're gonna do that. They're gonna continue listening to Donald Trump, and they have no intention of passing any type of immigration reform in the meantime. So between now and I guess the end of the election, possibly when the swearing in happens in January of next year, it seems Congress has no interest in any type of solution for the border.
You know, there's an interesting political mystery that's only tangentially related to this, but people who are supporting Donald Trump are getting hammered in the polls, in elections. It happened in 2020, 2022. Carrie Lake is down disastrously in Arizona as we speak, because people don't like this nonsense where the Republicans do nothing because of the orders of Donald Trump. And they've lost popularity because it was so obvious they killed their own border bill. On the other hand, it doesn't affect Donald Trump at all. It's so weird. Like they're like, oh yeah, if you support Donald Trump and you're one of these crazies that are totally, unproductive, we're gonna punish you. But the guy who ordered you to do it, well, no, we still like him. He's still rock and roll. I just don't get it. That one I haven't solved.
So final thing I'll mention, Cenk, because it's I guess somewhat relevant, although I would argue that Biden has proven in recent history that he doesn't care at all, and these are individuals who don't really flex any real power in Congress. Pramila Jayapal jumped in on this, and she's the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and she says that this would be a big mistake for the Biden administration if they are in fact thinking of implementing executive orders. This would be an extremely disappointing mistake. Cruel enforcement only policies have been tried for 30 years and simply do not work. Democrats cannot continue to take pages out of Donald Trump and Stephen Miller's playbook. We need to lead with dignity and humanity. But honestly, I don't really think the Biden administration is concerned about what Pramila Jayapal has to say or what congressional Democrats have to say. Biden is not performing well among key demographics in the Democratic voting base. That includes young people, that does include progressives. A lot of it has to do with his poor decisions in regard to supporting everything that Israel wants to do in Gaza. But I don't know if doing nothing at the border is gonna help him. I don't know if doing something at the border is necessarily gonna hurt him more than he's already hurt himself on other issues. But I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, so well, it's a mixed bag on Pramila Jayapal here. So first, to be fair, I'm sure that her position on immigration is to the left of mine, right? And in the past, I've criticized her for not being progressive enough and not being a strong enough leader for progressives. So I'm glad that she's criticizing Joe Biden on this issue, and on this issue, she's probably to the left of me. Okay, now having said that, I'm sorry, but her words don't matter because when push came to shove, and she had to fight for progressive policies in the bills that were being debated and negotiated, she gave away all of her power, and basically she went with, and I'm not making this up, it was called the Trust Biden strategy. And she was totally screwed over on that strategy. Biden lied to her and then changed the order of the bills and then never passed the progressive policies that were promised. And so Biden knows, oh, it doesn't matter at all. If I tell her you're to vote for this, she'll vote for anything. And she'll get the other progressives to also vote for it. They'll put out tweets complaining, but at the end of the day, they refuse to use their power so I could run roughshod over them. So I don't even know if that statement registered at the White House, and if it did, they either had a good belly laugh over it or ignored it completely because of her actions. She will never, ever actually vote against Joe Biden in any way, shape, or form on any bill. That's why her statements, I'm sorry, and I feel bad saying this because it sounds harsh, but it's very literally useless.
Yeah, you know what? You articulated this way better than I did. So thank you, because that's exactly what I was thinking as I was reading her pushback on X, formerly known as Twitter, right? You've already proven yourself to be someone who concedes to Biden with just the tiniest amount of pressure. So I find it hard to believe that she wouldn't go along with what Biden wants in the end, but who knows, we'll see. And I am curious to see how Biden is gonna play this, because I do think that if nothing is done at the border, it will hurt him in the upcoming general election. And as we know, he's not performing well in the polls as we speak. So this is yet another mark on his record that could hurt him with some Democratic voters who have now have firsthand experience of what a migrant crisis is like. And so with that said, yeah, go ahead, Cenk.
Yeah, and one last thing, guys. I'm super curious to see what the lib reaction here is. And if you're not familiar with all these terms, liberals these days means like moderate Democrats, establishment Democrats that love Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. So my guess is the ones that were freaking out about the kids in the cages, if Biden does at least this particular Trump policy, that doesn't necessarily lead to kids in cages, to be fair, but copies one of the Trump immigration policies that they said was so damaging, so terrible, the worst of the worst. My guess is every one of them will say that same exact policy is totally fine under Joe Biden. So at least credit to Jayapal for speaking out against it, which almost no other Democrat will.